Hey guys, it's Ann Yorks from the Flower Box, and I'm really excited to be kicking off our holiday season with this really fun Santa cookie tutorial. This tutorial goes along with our Santa cookie decorating kit, and it features 5 cookie designs. So today I'm going to show you 2 cookies with stencils, and then I'm going to show you how to decorate 3 cookies, including a really cute Santa, his elf, and a cute reindeer. If you haven't had a chance to check out our new website at flowerbox.com, definitely check it out for this tutorial. You can find the Santa Kit page, and on that page we have tons of information, including free templates, an icing guide, a guide to baking the cookies, and lots of bonus information. Plus, you can order the kit itself, or if you already have some of these cutters and stencils, you can order a la carte, really easy, all on the same kit tutorial page. Check it out. All right, enough chit chat. Let's get this Santa party started. Let's cookie it up. We're gonna start off this tutorial with my favorite cookie from the set, Santa himself. Now this cookie cutter is really special to me because I designed it with the team at Ann Clark Cookie Cutter Company. There's a lot of Santa face cookie cutters out there in this world, but I love that this is a full Santa, so we can see all of his details, including the buckles on his boots. So to get started, you might have noticed that I have some yellow outlines on the cookie before I started outlining with my icing. Those are guidelines that I traced onto the cookie just using a yellow food marker. It's made out of food coloring, and the template. You can find the template on flowerbox.com, and it's free to download. So once I have my Santa outlined, I'm ready to start flooding in all of these different icing areas. And when I have a lot of icing areas like this, I'm always trying to decide, well, which icing area should I flood in first? Because I like to flood alternating areas to allow the icing to dry. So in this case, I'm going to try to work background to foreground. So his face, his hat, and his jacket are all going to be underneath his beard and the fur on his hat. So let's flood those areas first. Also, notice how careful I'm being around those piped lines. I want to see those piped lines after the icing dries, so I'm not flooding right up against them. I'm really using my boo-boo stick to tap the icing so that that line is still visible after the icing dries. It just adds a really neat dimension and definition to this cookie. Once those icing areas have a chance to dry, and I usually let them dry for about an hour in front of a floor fan. I have a fan set up in front of my bakery rack. I'm ready to go back in and flood the other icing areas. This will prevent any bleeding between the colors, especially when you're using highly contrasting colors like red and white. This is the fun part. So I have these awesome nonpareils, and a pouch of these nonpareils are included in the Santa cookie decorating kit. These are from Wilton, and when they catch the light, they almost have a pearlescent look to them. They're really awesome. So I'm just gonna add some flood icing to the fur and his jacket and on the cuffs of his sleeve, and then I'm pouring the nonpareils onto those wet icing areas. And they're wet enough that they're just gonna stick, and when I give Santa a little shake, you can see that they only stay in the place where there's wet icing. Now don't waste any of these nonpareils. I always like to do this on top of a paper towel, or even a coffee filter is really helpful. And then you can just pour them back in so that you can use them on the next cookie. It's a great way just to keep all of your little nonpareils in one place. Now we're ready to add the details. I'm gonna add Santa's nose, and I always think he looks a little bit more jolly when you make the nose a little exaggerated like that. And I'm using that flood icing just so it's nice and round and smooth. Then I'm gonna add buckles to his boots, and I sized down to a tip number 1.5 for that small detail. And now I'm just gonna pipe a couple of accents. I'm gonna add some white buttons to his jacket, 2 teardrops are going to make his mittens. So one large teardrop for the hand and then a smaller one for the thumb. And I always keep the thumbs pointed in. Sized down on my black icing to add the face accents too. So 2 little eyes using tip number 1.5, and of course Santa's little sly side smile, because he knows who's been naughty and nice this Christmas season. And there you have it, a really cute Santa that looks super delicious. Now, after all of that work, let's change up the decorating pace a little bit with a stenciled cookie. I love stenciled cookies because they come together a lot quicker than the hand decorated cookies, and they just make a really great accent on the cookie platter. So I have my hexagon, and I'm just going to flood in, and I'm going to let that base dry for about 6 hours. We really want that icing to set up before we put any pressure on the surface when we stencil. I'm going to airbrush a background onto the stencil, and I've mixed pearl with pink to create a pastel pink. And with my Preppy Stripes stencil, I'm going to airbrush a background onto the hexagon. I just think this looks like peppermint stripes or candy stripes, and I'm keeping it ultra pastel so that it doesn't interrupt the legibility of the stencil when we add the words. Now, using stiff red icing, I'm going to squeeze some icing onto my scraper, get my stencil in place, and I'm holding it in place with my thumb. That's my anchor finger. And I'm just going to spread the icing across the stencil. And I'm pretty generous to start. I want to just make sure that I get to all areas of that stencil. I don't want to leave anything uncovered. So I'll spread the icing around, and then I'll remove the excess with one last swipe. Now I'm ready to peel back the stencil. It's almost like peeling a sticker. And before I'm done, I just want to add a finished border to this Santa Claus is coming to town. Here's another really fun cookie to go with this set. This is Santa's right-hand man, his elf, and he's the one busy in the workshop getting everything done. So we had to include him. So I'm going to start off by outlining his hat and his tunic with a tip number 2 in green. So we're just going to get these icing areas set out. Now, I feel pretty confident outlining this cookie without a template, but if you don't want to freehand this cookie, definitely check out the template on the kit page and download it. You can either use it in your projector or trace some lines onto the cookie to help you with where those outlines need to go. Now I'm going to add in some flood icing, and I want to make these polka dotted, so I flood in those areas, and while that green is still wet, I go back in with my red flood icing and I add the polka dots. I always start in the middle to keep my spacing, and it really keeps my cookies consistent from cookie to cookie. This icing is more of a 20-second icing consistency. That means it's a little bit thicker than the flood, so it holds its shape. And I'm going to outline and flood the head all with one icing bag. It just speeds things up a little bit when I do it that way. We'll flood in the tunic and add the polka dots, and we'll also get his shoes flooded in as well. And now we're ready to add the fur on his hat. So here's that sprinkle pouch that comes in the cookie decorating kit. And like I said, these sprinkles, these NONPAREILS, they have a little bit of a pearl sheen to them when they catch the light. They just look really cool and pretty. And I'm gonna pour those NONPAREILS onto the wet icing areas and just make sure I get all of that area covered. This elf cookie is one of those cookies that looks a little bit strange until you start adding the details. So stick with it until the very end because it gets really cute at this point. I have a tip number 1 on my brown icing, and I'm going to outline the hair and flood in the elf's hair. Then I'm going to add a couple details to his nose and his ears. and I'll add his eyes and his smile. He needs some buttons on his tunic, and then we're going to also add some fur on his tunic and at the base of his shoes. And now this little elf is ready for Christmas Eve. The next cookie I'm going to show you is the cute reindeer. And I love the shape of this cookie cutter, but I do like to add 4 legs to the reindeer. So you can see that as I'm outlining this cookie, I'm reserving some space in the leg area for the legs that are in the background. Now, to add just a little bit of interest to an otherwise all brown cookie, which can get a little one note, I do have some light brown fur that I flood in first before I flood in the brown. And I just think that breaks up all of that brown icing, and you can add some scribe marks to make it look like fur, and I just think that makes the cookie look more interesting. Once that has a chance to dry, we'll just go back in and flood in those legs that are in the rear, and now we're ready to add the details. We're going to add some black hooves, and I'm just using my piping icing, so I'm just piping and flooding all with one little icing bag. That icing area is small enough that you don't need to mess around with flood icing. I'm going to add an eye and a smile, and now it's time to add the reindeer's antlers, and I'm just doing some really small scrolls, and so it's a strong hand pressure as I squeeze the start of the scroll, and then I just curve that back in towards the head. And I love the look of these antlers. I always try to make sure that the one in the foreground is overlapping his head. We're almost done with this guy. I've switched my brown to tip number 65. That makes a really quick ear and a super quick tail. Notice how I put a little bit of wiggle into it, so that gives the tail some motion. Then a tip number 44 for his collar with some yellow jingle bells. And of course, you have to have a red nose. And this reindeer is ready to lead the sleigh. For the last cookie I'm going to show you, this is another accent cookie. We're going to stencil this guy, and we're going to be using red airbrush. So I outlined the cookie in red this time just so that it matches the airbrush color. And I always plan out really carefully how much icing to make. You can see that I have used this white icing to the very last drop. So that's the beauty of tipless bags right there, is that you really can get every last little drop of icing out. Now I'm ready to airbrush, and I'm using the preppy stripe stencil again. Anytime I'm airbrushing with stripes, I just want to be really careful to follow the stripes. That'll really reduce any of the blending or bleeding or blurring that can happen when you're airbrushing with stripes. So I start off with a light pass to get started, and then I just want a little bit deeper color so you can see that I'm passing over it one more time. Now I'm ready to lift the stencil genie. I always rock to the side just to keep it from smudging, and we have that beautiful stripes pattern. Now before we finish this cookie, I'm going to add some piped green lines. Those lines will keep the cookie packaging from sitting directly on the cookie surface and will really prevent any sticking to that airbrush color. But if you're ever concerned about airbrush color running or sticking to the cookie package, you can always give it a very light dusting of cornstarch, and that will absorb the excess moisture and really reduce any problems that you could see there. Thank you so much for watching the cute Santa cookie tutorial. I hope you learned something new. If you're looking for those bonus materials, the free templates and the icing guide, definitely check out the kit page on flowerbox.com. And if you make these cookies, be sure to tag me on social media at the Flower Box Shop. I can't wait to see what you make. And as always, happy decorating!